Hi everyone, we've got some Teasels and Honesty today. This nice loose one, it's in memory of Helena. I thought we'd do a little bit of a tribute for her. She loved Jane Betteridge's work, and I've asked Jane if it's okay if I can do something inspired by her work, and we're going to have a go at some Teasels and Honesty. So it's nice and loose today. So what I've got is very dark today, it's very hard for you to see, is I've got 3 Teasels. It honestly doesn't matter where you've got them placed, and then I've loosely mapped in where some Honesty might be. I might lose it when I do the watercolour washes, but it's absolutely fine because we can just play around as we're going. Colours wise, okay, so I'm using a couple of different colours today which you probably won't have, but I'll tell you how you can make something similar with student quality. So the first one that I'm using is Quinacridone Gold. The best way to replicate that is to use a bit of raw sienna and a tiny bit of burnt sienna in that. That will give you something similar, so it's a more golden colour. The next one I'm using is Perylene Violet. That one is the best way to make that with student quality is permanent rose, cobalt blue and a touch of burnt sienna, so you get in that sort of aubergine colour. Then I've got some just dabbed onto my palette, neat permanent rose and some burnt sienna. I am going to use also some FW Sepia Ink. If you haven't got that at home, then you can use just normal sepia watercolour quite thickly. And apply that in a similar way. Okay, so we'll crack on. So we want water everywhere and plenty of it. This is where we lose all of our drawing anyway. The light really is bad today, it's so dark outside. Hopefully when I get a bit of paint on you'll be able to see better. And then I'm also going to use a tiny bit of gum arabic, so that's about half a teaspoon that I've just poured straight onto the paper. And I'm going to take it mainly where that Honesty is, but you can take it everywhere really, doesn't matter. What it's going to do is enable me to lift out a little bit easier later because we're using the Saunders paper. Okay, so I've got my round number 10 and we're going to go in nice and loose, and we're coming in with the, so this is the Quinacridone Gold. Your mixture can be the raw sienna, burnt sienna, or it could be a little bit of gamboge. You don't have to follow exactly the same colours today. And I'm just sweeping that in. The paper's quite wet today and I want it to stay quite wet until I've got the ink on. So I'm doing some verticals today, vertical stripes really, to start off with. Give a nice flow. I'll just flow the brush through where it's the direction of the twiggy bits of the Honesty. And then I'm going to come into the violet and I'm just sweeping that through. What I want is a bit of a loose background. If it's not dark enough I won't be able to lift out and get a lovely feel on the Honesty. You could even use a little bit of a blue in here, and that would give a green effect similar to the photograph, but I've kept it quite autumn feeling. So all these, this featheriness, I just want that to happen. going to dab into a tiny touch of rose as well. You know I can't resist a bit of rose. And keep that towards the bottom, and it just giving it a bit of a lift in places. Should still have plenty of time. If you put plenty of water on, should have plenty of time. Okay, so I've got the sepia ink here. I'm just going to reference these Teasels because I've already lost my lines. And I'm just going to pipette. Just give it a bit of a shake. It's pipette a blob in, technical term. So it already looks like a teasel. That's a bonus, without me having to do much. So if you were using sepia watercolour now, then you would just take that on with a brush and dab it in. You just want to make sure that it's nice and thick. The ink is beautiful because it just does split out. You can see it splitting out already. And then I'm going to run, which is quite a brave thing to do, some bits down like that. Right, just get a little bit of this in my palette, just so I've got some of it to work with. And then I've got my line writer or rigger brush, and I also need something to scribe with. Okay, so I've even rushed off and found my knitting needle. So anything to scribe with that you've got that's fairly sharp but isn't going to wreck your paper. So as you can see, because it's still wet, I can do quite a lot of these spiky teasels. In fact, you could leave the teasels the way they are, but I do quite like these additional bits. So I'm just feathering them out really. Just dragging that colour out a little bit. So I've done a couple of little forward thinking things here. So the first thing that I've done is I've put the honesty the other side so that I know I'm not going to come over with ink, and therefore I'm going to be able to lift out. So that's helpful. And then also the gum arabic is going to help. So what I'm doing now is I'm running down the stem, indenting, and as I'm indenting, that's giving a more defined line. So you might panic when you go in and find that the colour flows quite a lot, but it's quite a nice effect for it to do that. It's going to give it a nice smoothy effect. Lots of atmosphere in this one. So they're already looking really teasel-like, which is good. We can work into these again later. Okay, whilst it's still wet, I'm going to just bring on some of the sepia ink, just dab off a little bit, just start to create these lovely bits that are stemming off. You've got to really be quite brave and just go for it. It's only a piece of paper. All these little bits add really nice movement. Don't be afraid to do a few extra. You can add a bit more down these stems. You can add a bit more to the teasels. It's one of those ones where you do a lot of work when it's wet, and that pays dividends later. Don't be afraid to overlap them a little bit as well. This one here is a really nice key one that you want to get a really nice feel on. So I'm just adding a little bit more ink in there as well. This is just like dabbing really, just adding a little bit more texture in there. You could, if you wanted to, try a little bit of salt. Okay, I've got round number 6. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of neat rose. And I'm just dropping little bits in. So this is just going to give a hint of colour in places. So I'm sticking to the same side with that colour. So if there's any more you want to do whilst it's still damp, any more indents, you can do. If that colour isn't moving, add a bit of water to it. You can either add a bit with a brush. Trouble is with the ink is it tends to sit quite still, so if you're adding anything to the ink after, you want it to flow, you want it to soften in. So I'm just adding a bit of water. We're breaking all the rules today. Okay, and then with the sepia ink as well, I'm just going to run through to start to create the honesty twigs. Now this bit doesn't have to be too hard, so I haven't got too much ink on the brush, so I'm not going mad, and I just want to create a softness in here. Again, don't be afraid to overlap. Just giving you a base for it to work from. A guide for later. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm coming in and lifting the honesty, because we've put the gum arabic on. If you come on with a little bit of water and just create that sort of shape, and then you need that tiny little bit at the very end, you're going to get a really nice clean looking little bit of honesty. So I'm just coming through. So I've done those two up there, just give it a few seconds and then dab off. And then that one, if I dab off, you can see a really nice shape appearing. And I've done one next to it. What you've got to be careful of is you don't dot it too pattern like. So you're better to have a few overlapping. Few different shapes. It can very easily become too pattern like. You've got to always think random. So I'm just doing that tiny little bit with the line writer. If it's not lifting, then you're just going to have to come on with more water and agitate it a little bit more. I think most of you do have gum arabic, and it's perfect for this sort of thing. And it saves the whiteness of masking fluid, because you want that little bit of colour showing through. I can see an odd pencil line now. So if it doesn't all quite lift, then just come back on with a bit more water and it should then lift out. So you want a nice random effect, really. Clump a few together. It's easier to do one, then come back in and do another one next to it. So you're getting those lines appearing. See, I've got a few twos together, so I'm now going to make a three together. It's all, I'm consciously thinking about random all the time. Get big clumps of it with lots overlap. So I'll just agitate on that a little bit more. And it's just really how much you want to do. It works really nice where it's darker, because you're going to lift out easier. You see that definition. But I've kept the whole thing quite light this time. And take a little one out here. So I'm altering where the little hanging bit is on every one as well. So it's all, I'm thinking all the time about how I'm changing them so it doesn't end up looking pattern like. And I can just put a few odd sort of random dabs just to break it up. And you might see a tiny bit of something, but not too much. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm bringing in some of the violet colour that we've used in the background, and I'm just coming round a few of the right hand sides of the honesty, and then with a wet brush I'm just softening it in, so it's just giving that little bit more definition. I don't want it to be glaringly obvious that I'm outlining, and hence why I'm softening in, but it's just giving it that little bit of shadow. I'm doing 2 at a time. You can do 1 at a time if you are worried about it drying too quickly. It doesn't matter so much if it smudges a little bit inwards. It doesn't have to be a clean softening because you're adding shadow at the same time. So every little bit of this that we're doing is adding a little bit more shadow and a little bit more definition to these without going over the top. Because they're light and delicate, we can still see the colour underneath because we've not lifted too heavily. So it should be working really well. And we're sticking to these muted tones. So you can come round all of them if you want, you can do a few if you want. Just giving that little bit of extra definition. You can come in with a little bit of the Sepia Ink as well. Remember, those colours from the background would shine through if you want to add a few dabs of anything. So if you wanted some of the gold colour in there, you could add that. So if I come on to a couple with a little bit of the sepia as well, and just spread that through. What you don't want to do is overwork them so you lose the light. It's important that you keep the light. So I might only touch a couple of places with the sepia, but it's enough to give it a bit of shadow. So I'm just using my line writer on the number 10. Doesn't have to be too precise, just soften that in. So you should be getting that little bit more definition with every little bit of this that you're doing. If you've used a different colour in the background. Okay, so I've dried that off now. What I'm going to do now is just run some more defined twigs through for the honesty. So make sure you reference the picture and that you don't, unless you've got one in the background, you don't come over the actual honesty, because that's going to come in front of the twigs and it's going to help to join these all together. So take your time, think about balance as you're going. So you want it to feel balanced, the picture. So you can make up an odd twiggy bit that holds it together. What you don't want is floating honesty. So it can't float, it's got to have something holding it to something. You can take your time much more with something like this because it's disjointed in the way that you're moving around the picture. So when we're doing branches we tend to flow a little bit more. This doesn't flow as much because you've got the honesty in between. So I'm following those loose soft lines that I had earlier, but I'm not too concerned if I don't get all of them. So if there's an odd one in the background still, that's great. So remember, you can connect through. So I can start to connect these in ways. So you don't always see every single stem going to one of these seed pods, but you do want to see most of them, because that just connects everything together. So I've got a lot of floaty ones up here. So I've got a stem here that needs to go somewhere. So I'll make sure I bring that down. Stem this way. I think I might even take one up there. And this thing about connecting, so I can see a few little bits, they're connected on already. This needs to be connected. I'm going to bring that through to make that a thicker stem. That can come that way. Working quite nicely. Need a tiny bit more ink. So I'm just going to thicken a couple of these up a bit so they're not quite as delicate at the bottom. I think that holds back the base back together a little bit. And then just bring a few little bits through. So that it doesn't feel too top heavy. Temptation to bring one this way, so I'm just going to come a little bit this way. Just because it leads the eye to the teasels then. Okay, so lastly I'm just going to come on and just sharpen up a couple of these teasels a little bit. Now I don't want to go mad, but I feel like they just need a little bit more definition, especially on this one. So I'm going to bring some of the ink on. give a little bit more definition here. A little bit more down here. I'm not going to come all the way to the end. I'm just picking out little bits. And the same here. It's a whole thing of less is more. I'm just picking up little bits of definition. Just a little bit more there. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do, which you guys probably won't have at home, some of you might have it, so this isn't essential, this bit. I'm just going to dab a little bit of water on each of these teasels. And then some of you will have seen me use this in class. It's this copper powder which resembles eyeshadow. And you can just sprinkle a little bit on. So you might have a bit of eyeshadow lying around, you might have a bit of copper ink you could use, you might be able to use a watercolour pencil if you use a bit of sandpaper and just shave a little bit on, but it's just a little bit of sparkle just on the teasels. In fact, you can hardly see it on the video. And when that's dry, the rest of it will just blow off. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed today. I'll see you next week. Bye.